morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I have to say I was a bit worried because I prepared this presentation without knowing what others were going to say, but it just so happens that it fits. Let me just see if I can make it now. And then I just click here. So, it fits, I was saying, both with what the previous speaker said and also with the keynote presentation. So I'll pick up some of those points as I move through my presentation. If you allow me, just a little recap of the reason why you posed the question here: what should the post-2015 agenda around these issues look like? The assumption is, of course, that these issues should be on the agenda, and I would like to address that assumption. First of all, as Jomo highlighted in his presentation, the emerging consensus around this agenda is that it will be about poverty eradication in the context of sustainable development in all its dimensions. And clearly, food security and nutrition, as well as agriculture, have very strong linkages to the poverty eradication agenda, but also to sustainable development in all its dimensions. So it's really a cluster of issues that is quite intimately connected to many of the different issues that are being debated nowadays. So I see it as something quite different than other more sort of narrow, perhaps sectoral issues being addressed. It's really at the core of what sustainable development should be about, and the vision we should have for a sustainable future. There's also clearly a need to address the limits of the MDG agenda. Some of those limits were highlighted by the keynote speaker. One of the limits, beyond the limited ambitions and the focus just on hunger as opposed to nutrition, more broadly speaking, is the compartmentalization of the goals and the way in which implementation or reporting around the goals did not encourage looking at the various interlinkages around food security or hunger, for that matter. There is also a need to address these issues through the global framework, because by and large these are global problems, although with different geographies and specificities depending on context, and also because of the growing integration of the food systems that underpin, that need to underpin progress towards food security. Many of the systems also that feed into food systems, if you allow me this kind of this little pun, are also increasingly integrated, and I'm thinking of climate-related systems, of course, environmental systems, but also systems around the production of knowledge and technologies or financial systems that are relevant to have a bearing upon the way we produce and consume and distribute food. And of course, many of the challenges that confront agriculture really require international cooperation from a perspective of, for example, mitigating price volatility, but going all the way to addressing health-related concerns, trade, the development of a new set of technologies around climate change adaptation, mitigation, and so forth. As I already said, I think the new agenda should be very different than the MDG agenda. And the first thing I would like to highlight, and this is a bit of a pet peeve of mine, is I think we're quite obsessed now in the UN system with promoting standalone goals. Perhaps it's just my impression, but I think we should really take on board the fact that there is no such thing as a standalone goal, and the new framework should look very clearly interconnected as a reflection of the fact that the problems are interconnected, certainly so around this cluster of issues. Also, as the previous speaker was highlighting, many of the challenges and the solutions to food security and nutrition are really very context-specific. And there is a need to make room for that and to sort of build upon context specificities, allow for a sharing of knowledge, of experiences, but also allow for agenda setting and governance of the solutions at the local level. So the fact that problems are interconnected and a lot of the issues are context-specific, again, calls for this multi-sectoriality and integrated approaches to the agenda. Sorry for putting an acronym there, I just didn't want to put 3 lines. That policy coherence for development is also very important from a policy perspective. Also to take on board is the fact that this new agenda will not be about ODA by and large. It'll be about sort of a much broader understanding of what it means to implement a development agenda. And it needs to acknowledge that in the discussions on implementation, in the reporting, but also in the design of the goals. So the issue of aligning policies in different sectors and aligning different sources of investment to achieve common goals is very important. So it's a really different type of game, I think, than the design of the MDG framework was. I don't particularly like this word, but I think it says a lot of things. I think the new agenda should really focus on addressing nexuses and also promoting nexus approaches to the basic issues around development. By nexus, I don't just mean interdependencies, but I mean interdependencies that are also terrains of complementarity, but also potential conflict, where there might be trade-offs among different development priorities that really need very open and transparent governance in order to make progress towards food security and nutrition. To be a bit less abstract, some of the key nexuses that need to be built into the agenda are certainly the rural-urban nexus that I'm quite glad was raised by the colleague from Chesty, but also the food-water-energy nexus, perhaps the one that is most often talked about. And I think also the nexus sustainable agriculture, food security, and nutrition is one where we need more thinking, more research. Even just the issue of nutrition-sensitive agriculture opens up a whole very contested terrain from a research perspective, but also from a policy perspective. And then this is not often looked at as a nexus, but the way in which public and private investments around food security, food systems, and agriculture, and all the areas that have an influence on them, also requires reflection in the context of the agenda, so that complementarities are promoted and interdependency is recognized. So my point here is that the new agenda can foster a better alignment of policy choices and investment choices around these nexuses. Although it cannot do everything, it can set goals and targets that highlight the interdependencies and that in a way force considering them and reporting on progress around interdependencies. And it can also foster the creation of inclusive and transparent implementation mechanisms, which are really, really important in order to promote multi-sectoral approaches, but also to govern the trade-offs. And because there will be winners and losers in the short term around all the issues where a nexus exists. The example that I would like to just spend a couple of words on is precisely the rural-urban nexus. Here, there are very interesting dynamics of integration and growing interdependency, but they don't necessarily result in greater food security and better nutrition, nor in development. For example, we have a continuous predominance of rural poverty, a rural concentration of poverty, and the paradox of food insecurity among small farmers. Within the debate on the post-2015 agenda, there is a seeming assumption that urbanization per se will resolve many of these problems, the problem of rural poverty certainly, but I would take issue with that. It's not going to result from business as usual. We also have a growing diversification of rural economies and within agriculture, but again with mixed developmental impact. We have this growing interdependence with urban economies in many areas, but if you look beyond Italy, but even within Italy, there are many gaps in the hardware of connectivity, rural-urban connectivity, meaning infrastructure, in particular, but also in the software, in the institutions to govern the connectivity, in developing the skills that people need in order to be able to benefit from living lives that are at the interface of rural-urban spaces and so forth. We also have this growing demand in the rural sector to produce more, better quality, more sustainably, but continuous underinvestment in the rural assets that are going to sustain the necessary rural transformation to address this demand, and the mixed developmental impact of private investment. So a set of issues that need to be governed in order to harness the rural-urban interdependency towards progress for food security and nutrition. Sorry, I need to move forward. So what does it mean to bring this nexus lens to an agenda of promoting rural transformation? I think some of the key areas of where action is required have to do with promoting investment in innovative solutions, knowledge, technology around these nexus issues, whether it's food, water, energy, the agriculture nutrition issue, or other. The alignment of public and private investments, particularly around, again, issues of connectivity and how to govern it. The investment in rural people to be able to manage these interdependencies and also to benefit from the connectivity. Investment in connectivity itself. And the work on governance. The governance of the nexuses is perhaps the most challenging. To conclude, what does it mean for the post-2015 framework? I think you might conclude from the slides so far that what I mean is that the framework should look quite messy, and I think that the framework should look simple actually, but make room allow for complexity to be addressed maybe at a lower level. So it needs ambitious and inspirational goals, but also flexibility to set targets that are context-specific, both as concerns food security and nutrition outcomes, and as concerns the enablers. You were raising issues related to enabling policies, to foster consumer awareness, to valorize local production, etc. It also has to address or foster implementation of reporting modalities that encourage this multi-sectoriality, the partnerships, the networks, etc. If there is a goal on food security and nutrition, or on agriculture, food security and nutrition, I think it's important that that is framed in a nexus way, whether that's food and water security, whether it's food security and sustainable agriculture and nutrition, etc. I think it really should highlight and avoid the standalone temptation. I'm speaking not on behalf of my institution here, I should say, but sort of tell you what I think. It's also important that a rural focus and a focus on promoting rural-urban equality is brought into all the goals and targets that have relevance in this regard. For example, targets and goals that are related to what can catalyze investment in rural areas and in rural-urban connectivity, infrastructure, energy, financial inclusion, education in particular. It might seem obvious, but bringing sort of a rural and rural-urban sensitivity into the design of these targets is not something we can take for granted. And then, taking a food security and nutrition lens to relevant goals and targets. For example, when designing targets around infrastructure or energy, consider what could be the most relevant targets or indicators to look at their connection to the way, for example, food is produced, to agriculture, to women's concerns as primary providers of nutrition, etc. So that's my conclusions. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you.